Remember I said there are days in which no news happens, and then there are weeks in which everything happens. And boy, the last 2-3 weeks, woof, you couldn't look at the news and not be. And the interesting thing is how quickly it's moved on. So you've got this incredibly controversial issue now, whether it's international, national, or local, and then it's immediately superseded by another one. And just as you think, I've just started to get a grip on that, woof, we're on to something else. It makes it very hard, I have to say, to emotionalise the news when you're halfway through forming an emotion and a new event arrives. I imagine it. If I was in a newsroom, I have to say, or at a news desk in New Zealand at the moment, I'd be wetting myself, because this is what you're born for, these sorts of moments, and communicating that news to an expectant, wide, and you would imagine pretty engaged public just at the moment. Well, obviously today, how engaged the public will be very interesting as the state broadcaster Television New Zealand goes through a cost-cutting operation which is likely to see news severely and significantly truncated at that after what? News, obviously last week, that News Hub's entire newsroom will be hoovered up and exist no more after the 30th of June. And this is a really, really good time to bring in Andrew Holden, who is the Public Affairs Director at the News Publishers Association, because I imagine he is following all this with an eye of detail. Andrew, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Thanks for the invite.
Listen, first of all, tell me, who are the News Publishers Association of New Zealand?
So we're an industry body. We've been around for 125 years. We're basically the industry body for what used to be the old newspaper company owners. We're now news publishers because they publish everywhere, as you would know. They're on podcasts and internet and a whole range of stuff. But fundamentally, our members are the likes of NZME, published New Zealand Herald, and a string of the regional daily newspapers. We're Stuff, which of course in newspaper terms is the Dominion Now and the Press and Southland Times and a range of those. ODT is obviously a member of it. And then there's a whole string of the smaller ones, the Muir family who own the Gisborne Herald, Westport News, Wairarapa, Messenger. There's a string of smaller papers are also members of us as well. So industry body. The key element to it is we kind of run an advertising agency. So if a major advertiser says, look, I want to do print across the country, I don't want to have to ring up every newspaper and figure it. They can come to us and say, look, I've got $1 million. I want to hit all these kind of people. Can you book it into the newspapers and then share the money around? That's the main thing we do. But there's also that element where we obviously talk about the industry and what's going on.
Okay. So you don't represent radio and you don't represent television news sources or gatherers?
No, but obviously, because of my interests, keeping a very close eye on what's going on and the terrible news of the past week and a half, really. I mean, it's awful when you think there's, just from a human level, regardless of how you think they might have done their job, there's 350-odd people who look at losing their jobs, and amongst those probably around 250 journos. I mean, I think it's just a really sad week.
Okay, and obviously the details of what's going to happen at TVNZ News will come in the next wee while, and literally in the next wee while. Listen, the thing that strikes me, before we get into the content of the Fair Digital News Bargaining Bill and your views on that, is that you wouldn't want to train to be a journalist now, would you, if you're a young kid? The last thing I'd be doing is thinking of going to journalism school or to some sort of tertiary institution.
Makes it pretty brutal, doesn't it? I mean, it was always quite a tough business to get into, but when you see newsrooms disappearing altogether or reducing their numbers, it makes it really hard. And, you know, to your point, when you did in the introduction, you know, there are people who just love this business. You know, and I've been in it for 45 years. It's one of the most privileged jobs you can have ever, to be able to go and talk to people and try and understand what they think and what's happening to them, and then report that back to the wider community. It's an extraordinary position to be in. So you're absolutely right. You know, if you're a young journo and that's your passion, you'd love to get involved in it. What this means is that there's just less places for you to get a start in the business or to develop your career. And again, that's just another sad component to what's going on.
Oh, and the other thing is, television is sort of at the apex, isn't it? I mean, it's the top of the pyramid in terms of aspiration, ambition for a lot of young journalists as well. So you've sort of had that shorn off completely, haven't you? Well, not completely, but gee, it doesn't look like it looked a year ago.
No, it doesn't. Not everybody, of course, wants to stick their face on television. That's a particular kind of personality, if you like, who wants to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in terms of your profile, certainly within the industry, no, right? That the TV presenters were paid far more than the humble print journalist might have been, or let alone the radio person. I mean, it just removes those opportunities, which I think makes it hard. I mean, one of the interesting things though with the way the media has changed is that basically every journalist, regardless of what outfit they work for, they're really an all kind of journalist. You know, your iPhone in your pocket means you can take video, you can report to camera if you like, you can capture anything you like. So it's really interesting, and that's, you know, going back to your point around the journalism schools, that's what they teach now. Is they're sending graduates out who can pretty much work in any kind of platform, because that's what you need to be these days.
Listen, there is no question that advertisers are deserting traditional media. I've only got to look at my for example, I've subscribed. The only print, obviously, I get every day, although I subscribe to a large number of news sites, is the Otago Daily Times. The number of advertisements in that, I mean, and the size of that is just a pale shadow of what it might have been even 10 years ago, Andrew, and I imagine that's being experienced throughout the country. I look today at the Post, for example. Whenever I go to Wellington, I go, my God, they call that a newspaper? I come from that generation. How long before print media starts going the same way as electronic?
It's, crikey, we've been debating that for probably 20 years, ever since we could see the likes of, you know, Craigslist being launched in San Francisco and starting to chew up the rivers of gold, the classifieds. And, you know, and again, I'm your generation as well, Michael. I go right back. In fact, I worked on papers at the Press and the Age in Melbourne where you'd have 200 pages of classifieds, and that's, you know, and they just poured money into the business. I mean, it's a really fascinating question around print. There's clearly still enough people around the country who want a physical copy of the paper, enjoy that experience, to keep it going. It's really tough for the publishers at the moment. There's no newsprint being made here. Norske Skog, the big Norwegian paper maker, left New Zealand a couple of years ago, so all the newsprint's got to be brought in from overseas. The cost of ink and plates and everything has gone up, so it's really putting a big squeeze on print. I mean, can I tell you that there won't be any newspapers in 5 years? I don't know that, but gee, it's tough.
Yeah, and I can see why you'd want to go online. Which brings us to this next issue, and that, well, no, before I go on to that one. Listen, Andrew, the other thing is the Auckland University of Technology for the last 4 years, I think they're in their fourth year now, and ironically, I'll talk about the ODT in a second to do with it, have been running a sort of public trust or a media trust survey, essentially probing New Zealanders to whether or not they trust the media. And that's been on a steady and downward progression. We haven't seen the 2024 results yet, but there are indications that slide has continued further. In fact, it's accelerated. I see that some media take that quite seriously, because the Otago Daily Times, across its banner headline, declares itself the most trusted newspaper in New Zealand as a consequence of that particular survey. But I guess the issue that we're talking about here is, why have the New Zealand public lost so much confidence in the media, print, radio, television, and news gatherers in general?
Oh, it's a worldwide phenomenon. It's not New Zealand. In fact, New Zealand stacks up, I think, in probably about the top 10 of the countries in terms of trust in media. So it's actually, in relative terms, doesn't make it fantastic, but in relative
well, you
terms,
mean they're in the dump and we're sort of on the outskirts of the dump?
Yeah, that's right. You know, we stack up pretty well. And look, there's a whole range of things going to that, Michael. It's not just about what any individual journalist and the mistakes they may have made, and how a newspaper or a radio station or a broadcast corrects that mistake. It goes into a whole, the nature of discourse within society. There's a lot of research done into it in terms of the growth of social media and the fact that, for people that's often their first source of information, and also the community and the potential in there, and particularly the way those platforms drive their algorithms, is that you get caught in an echo chamber. So really all you're interested in, and that's an entirely understandable human driver, is, what you want to hear about is things that you agree with. And therefore, if you see the media reporting something else that you don't agree with, then your trust in what they're saying or the news coverage is going to be diminished. So, it's quite broad. It's a really interesting subject. And so I wouldn't pin it purely to say the media have got it wrong in the last 10 years. But then, no journalist, nobody in the media business would pretend that they've done everything right, or there hasn't been a growth in an opinion, if you like, or a change in the language that goes into the stories that might make somebody feel like they're not being told the truth. But it's a pretty broad issue. And you look, quite frankly, across the media, they do care about it, because, you want people to feel some confidence in the information you provide them, especially in times of crisis, right? Floods in Auckland or Tairāwhiti or Hawke's Bay. You want people to be confident that what you're telling about what's happening on the ground is actually true, and that you're not just finding a little microcosm of that disaster and blowing it out of proportion, and in fact the rest of the area is fine. So, it matters to media that people can have confidence that what they're reporting is by and large fundamentally the truth, as much as they can see it.
I would imagine it is fundamental, except I'm looking now at the fact that, 4 out of 5 New Zealanders don't trust the accuracy of the New Zealand media. And that's a huge proportion. Surely that can't all be down to the algorithms of social media. There must be other reasons, Andrew.
True. I mean, there's a whole combination of things. But the flip side of that, though, is that when there is a crisis, when there is a disaster, New Zealanders will go, vast majority will go to known media sites like a Stuff or a TVNZ or an RNZ to find out what's going on, to find out their information. So, there is a residual confidence, if you like, that when I need to know what's going on, I'm going to go to those big newsrooms because, or 2 or 3 of them. I always encourage people, don't ever stick to one outlet. Go and get a range of information. That's how you get a fuller view of what's going on. They still turn to them to find out what's happening.